Hi there, I'm Meredith Sumpter. I'm a director here at the Eurasia Group, and I have the pleasure this afternoon of bringing in John Lieber, who heads up our U.S. practice, to talk about what we're seeing with the Trump administration 4 weeks in to this new administration and what we can expect moving forward. Now, John, we have a new president who prides himself in being a disruptor, who is bringing in a lot of outsiders into Washington to change the way that things are done in Washington, with implications for both our relationships with foreign countries as well as our domestic policy, right? So, but in the last couple of weeks, we've seen some challenges to that immediate approach. And I'm curious as to your take on what's happening here and how you see the administration responding to the pushback that they've received.
Yeah, so I think certainly there's been a fair amount of pushback, both from kind of civil society in terms of protests in coastal elite cities, mostly concentrated amongst Democrats. There's been some pushback from Capitol Hill, specifically if you think about Russia and Trump's attempts at kind of resetting the relationship with Russia. You know, everybody that had clear Russia sympathies from his campaign or administration has been purged. Paul Manafort's out. Michael Flynn is now out. So I think there's definitely some constraints there. There's some constraints we're seeing from the courts. The court shut down his immigration executive order, said it was unconstitutional, hastily done, poorly thought through, and so forth. And so they now had to reboot that. And you're seeing some from kind of the foreign policy, like the government itself, the bureaucracy is pushing back. You're seeing a lot of leaks of sensitive, secret information, in some cases transcripts of conversations. And this is clearly some kind of, it's a, well, I won't say conspiracy, but it's like acts within the intel community to push back on Donald Trump by leaking damaging things to the press. That's what led to Michael Flynn's resignation. So obviously, he is a disruptive figure, as you said. He's unconventional as a politician. He's unconventional as a president. But he's got to operate inside a world with a lot of canny, savvy political actors who know how to, where to put the shiv when they want to stab you in the back.
Right.
And so I think that's going to take some getting used to for Trump. His team is inexperienced. He's brought in a lot of people from the campaign trail who are disruptive as well, but are not necessarily savvy government operators. And he surrounded himself with a lot of members of the military, especially in key foreign policy and national security positions. So I think it's going to take them some time to figure out how to push back on the kind of the bureaucracy.
That's right, and your point's on, like, you have someone who has led a family-run business for decades now, and he's finding that his decision-making style doesn't necessarily transfer well to the way that the government has been run, but still he is true to his disruptor credentials and will look to try to find ways. And is this your assessment, to continue to be, to, let's say, change the way that the work has been done with Washington? How does he do that now? How do you see him responding to this pushback and reconfiguring to be able to carry his policies forward?
Yeah, Trump's biggest asset is the fact that he won the presidency. No one thought he was going to win. He's got a really unique base. He's the only Republican that probably could have won in this election cycle. Hillary Clinton's a bad candidate, so maybe anybody could have beat her. But on the other hand, he won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, states that no other Republicans won for almost 30 years. And I think that gives him some credibility with the Republican Party and a license to kind of shake things up a little bit. And that's his biggest asset right now, the fact that he can take his message directly to those people who continue to support him. His approval ratings amongst Republicans are in the high 80s right now.
Wow.
Even though his approval ratings amongst Democrats are I think they're around 8. That's a single digit, high single digits, which is, reflects the polarization of our current political scene, but also reflects just, the fact that his unique attributes and characteristics. So, I think that's his biggest asset, and Republicans know that. Republicans know he remains popular, and so they're, at least with their base, and so they're going to continue to try to support him. His other asset is the fact that he's the president, and he's the only one that can sign the bills that congressional Republicans want to pass. So they see him as not a rubber stamp necessarily, but they see him as the key, he's the one person in the country that can help them implement their agenda, assuming they can pass something through Congress.
So basically, we have a president who is learning the ropes of Washington and will try to stay true to who he is and his agenda for the country, while trying to get control over the bureaucracy to help see his policies be pushed through, right? So, and something I wanted to ask you about, we've seen just over the last several weeks a slight change, if you think about it from a foreign policy standpoint, in the way in which the Trump administration is approaching its traditional alliances and relationships with what he said he would do on the campaign trail. And this owes largely to the influence and the respective spheres of influence of General Mattis for the Defense Department, Rex Tillerson, with the Secretary, who is now our Secretary of State, a new appointment of H.R. McMaster to be the National Security Advisor. All of these are professionals who are very well respected, who know how to run bureaucracies, and who have more of a pragmatic tact than that which President Trump has said on that he would take on the campaign trail. How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a constant struggle. There's going to be we've been calling it the establishment versus the revolutionaries. Tillerson, not necessarily a member of the government establishment, but certainly a member of the elite American CEO establishment.
Right.
And then you've got the revolutionaries, who are these Breitbart guys like Steve Bannon, Jeff Sessions guys like Stephen Miller, who are inside the White House whispering in Trump's ear. And I think there's going to be constant clashes on policy between these two groups. I think some days the establishment guys are going to win, like you saw this really normal Japanese state visit last week. Very normal, very diplomatic, really a success. I think that was largely coordinated by Mattis, Tillerson, and Kushner, is my understanding. And then you're going to have crazy disruptive things like the immigration executive order, which was largely pushed by Bannon and Miller. So it's going to be, this is going to swing back and forth. I think to some extent Trump himself is going to be responsible for kind of trying to organize the chaos, but he's a delegator. All indications are that he's a delegator who's not going to get involved in the nitty-gritty of the decision-making. And I think it's going to lead to a really inconsistent message coming out of the White House. The other thing is they have a lot of spokesmen. So you got Spicer talking to the media, you've got Bannon giving off-the-record quotes to the media, you've got people leaking, Conway's in front of the press all the time.
Right.
They've got a lot of spokesmen who are not coordinating on the same page on a message. So it's hard to negotiate with somebody like that. Donald Trump, what's your tax plan? Our tax plan is going to come out next week. It's going to be a 20% corporate tax rate. Well, actually, it's going to come out in mid-March. It's going to have a 30%. It's like you can't negotiate with somebody like that when they're not everyone. You can't push a policy agenda if everyone's not on the same page.
That's right.
So it's going to be, I think, pretty chaotic.
Interesting. Just want to interrupt just to remind our viewers, if you have any questions for John or for I, we'd love to hear them. Please send in your questions and we'll take them here shortly.
You can comment right down there.
That's right. You can comment right down there.
Right there.
And we'll look forward to engaging you in real time. So John, as you see these various sort of bureaucratic masters protecting their fiefdoms, if I may put it that way, so you have defense, you have state, you have treasury, you have commerce, with a White House that is very different from the last White House, which was the Obama administration was very much organized and centrally controlled, right? Where I think the beef from the bureaucracy was that the ministries did not feel like they had much say in high-level policy matters with the Obama administration. Whereas with the Trump administration, at least in its early days, as he is delegating and seems to be quite comfortable allowing his cabinet members to have their own views on issues and to go out and to act on them without strict guidance from the White House. How do you see this evolving? Do you see strong bureaucracies who are able to push forward their own sort of policy prerogatives, sometimes in tandem with the White House, sometimes not? Or do you see, perhaps with this new National Security Advisor coming in, a new order that will come to this White House? Well,
I mean, it's hard to prejudge the NSC process because we don't know what this guy's going to be like or how he's going to run things. So certainly McMaster's a very strong, very respected leader inside the military, is going to have a lot of sway with Mattis and presumably will work quite well with him. So I think you're going to see a little bit more order there. I think the other kind of turf stuff you highlighted is really interesting. If you look at the Treasury Department, there's this narrative going on of the Treasury Department versus the National Economic Council. Steve Mnuchin versus Gary Cohn, both Goldman alums who are going to have big voices in economic policy in an administration that doesn't have a lot of big voices in economic policy. And how they kind of grapple for control and dominance both in the legislative front and the policy-making front inside the administration.
Do you see them working together or working parallel?
They're going to have to work together. I mean, Cohn's got the advantage that he's going to be in the White House every day with, be able to walk in and talk to the president. Mnuchin's got all kinds of responsibilities around the globe to deal with. So he's got to go to the G20, the G8. He's got to worry about stuff that's just simply not on Cohn's plate. But they're going to have to work together to some extent because a lot of the expertise, like on tax policy, is inside Treasury, not inside the White House. But I think initially there will be some tensions and rivalry. And in the Bush administration, I worked in the Bush administration, there was a lot everybody, you felt that everyone was serving the president and on the same page and coordinating to get that done. And you don't get that sense from this group. You get the sense the president's there to kind of let everybody work it out on their own, and there's going to be a lot of different agendas that are pushed. And so if you don't have everyone, you don't have a message coming from the top that you all have to be on the same page, then I think, again, it's going to be pretty chaotic. We got a question here.
Good.
From Dave Power. And Dave's question is, are European and Asian governments still trying to formulate how they will deal, this is a good question for you, Meredith, are they still trying to formulate how they will deal with the Trump administration? How do they resolve this dilemma with the U.S.?
Okay, yeah, great question. I would say that speaking about Asian governments and also many European governments, they are taking more of a wait-and-see approach to the Trump administration. We've seen Trump stated policies largely in flux for many of the reasons that John has discussed here. And so
this inconsistency, these garbled messages, right? It's a problem not just on the legislative front, it's a problem with foreign governments as well.
It's certainly a problem. And it's also, I think you have the up risk of miscommunication because the Trump team is coming into power without an understanding of the very complex diplomatic signaling and diplomatic dances that take place that facilitate the communication between two countries.
Some are like that, but like it seems like Mattis gets that, right?
Yes.
I mean, those guys, Mattis,
Tillerson,
they're traveling around to Asia, they're going to Mexico.
They
sent Mike Pence to Europe to reassure the NATO allies.
Exactly.
So somebody in the administration is pushing
these governments are not necessarily, they're used to working with the White House, right? And so it's going to be a shift for them as they try to work out bilateral relations with the various ministries, all the while trying to ascertain whether those ministries are firmly aligned with the White House or where there could be some policy instability, moving forward. I think from Europe's perspective as well, there seems to be an indication that the Trump team is actually quite in favor of Brexit and of countries taking sort of their individual power, which could presage a breakup of the EU. That makes Europe quite nervous. That frankly makes large powers in Asia quite nervous as well, as they see a breakup of the EU as leading to greater geopolitical instability.
You have there's an affinity between American conservatives and British conservatives, at least, that they reject foreign control and they want more local control.
Right.
And Trump's nationalist campaign has kind of given some air to some of the nationalist movements in Europe, like Marie Le Pen in France, that could eventually sort of undermine some of the EU.
That's exactly right.
Okay, we have a question from Hilton Barlack. What does the business community think about the Trump administration? I think that they are, my view, talking to kind of lobbyists and hearing from some of our clients, they're apprehensive. They're trying to figure out what to make of it. Sometimes they don't know what to think of it. They're asking all the same questions that we are and that our viewers are. I think that a lot of folks see a lot of opportunity, though. For example, tax reform is something that many in the business community, it's something they really, really want to get done. U.S. has the highest corporate tax rate in the world at 35%. A lot of businesses want to get that down to 25 or 20%, and I think people see an opportunity to do that under this administration. Deregulation is another area where I think there's a real promise from the business community. Financial services, energy, labor regulations, all going to get rolled back from Obama levels. And then I think on trade, you've got a lot of people who are asking, should I make that investment in Mexico? What's going to happen to my investment in China? And kind of trying to, there's some uncertainty that he brings. I think I think that the Trump team pushes deliberately, but it's causing quite a bit of consternation among businesses that have investments in these places.
That's true. I would say that traditionally Republican presidents are viewed as being more in tune and aligned with the private sector community and with business leaders. That being said, I think this president has also shown that he does not mind ruffling feathers with the business community in terms of his priorities and bringing jobs back into America, regardless of what that means for the investments of many American domiciled countries or companies that have investments all across the world. I think you also see business leaders that are going to do what they can to look to inform the president's view of the importance of supply chains and how some of these policies could significantly disrupt not only supply chains but investment flows that actually at the end of the day are a net positive for not only U.S. businesses but U.S. families as well.
So here's another good question for you, Meredith, from Aman Thakur. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong, Aman, or I hope it's Aman. Trump seemed to do decently well at handling the North Korea missile launch during Abe's visit. I think you might have a different perspective on that. Do you think his handling of future crises in the region, particularly on the South China Sea, will be similarly effective?
Well, I would say we haven't yet seen what the response will be to the North Korean missile launch from the Trump administration.
Can we talk about what his response was at the press conference, though? Right? I mean, basically, Abe said, we're going to respond to this, and it's really something we take very seriously, yada yada. And then Trump basically said, "I'm with Shinzo," right?
He had one line at the end of the conference, the press conference, which basically said, we fully support Japan on this. It was really a non-response. It was a safe response. And what this tells you, and if this is the same Aman Thakur I think I know, hello to you and hope you're doing well.
Did I get the name right?
I think, yes, you did. It was a non-response, really. And so I think what this tells you is that the administration does not yet know how to respond. We have these sort of platitudes of there's going to be a strong response, but there has not yet been a North Korea policy review internally. The NSC is not yet operating functionally to be able to facilitate that kind of discussion. So my sense is that the administration has not yet formulated a response, and it's still early days for them to do that. How they actually will respond to other crises in the region, whether it's the South China Sea or elsewhere, remain to be seen for that very reason. There first needs to be a policy review. But I do expect that General Mattis and Rex Tillerson will be quite influential. I would also say that it appears, I don't know if you share my view of this or not, but his son-in-law, who's a senior advisor to the president, Jared Kushner, has been in a very central role in facilitating constructive ties with many of these countries, and has become the go-to guy in the White House for many of these countries.
I think that's
so
right. It seems that way. Both corporates and other countries have seen Kushner as the guy to go talk to, who can kind of put a reasonable spin on things inside the White House.
Busy guy.
And very busy guy. Yeah. I mean, he's one of the only ones. And Trump listens to him, and he has the advantage of being kind of a bridge to the outside and has the ear of the president. So it's really an incredible role for. I mean, he's 35 years old. He no experience in government whatsoever. Really,
but he's a deal maker, right?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, he inherited a real estate fortune, that was his father built. So, I mean, he's become somebody Trump trusts. I think that's the most important thing he has going for him.
He's also the inside guy in terms of he's family as well as
yeah.
So that's important.
Here's a question from Fabi Vasquez. What's the deal with the ending of environmental regulations in the U.S.? I think I'd argue this is overblown. If you look at the environmental rollback you've seen, right now it's all targeted at Obama-era things. They're not yet defunding the EPA. They're not yet kind of going after more. They're not trying to repeal the Clean Water Act. They're not doing some more radical things they might try to do. Everything they've done so far, ending the Clean Power Plan, repealing the streams rule. There's a whole bunch of the methane emission thing. These are all things that were Obama-era climate goals that they're trying to, and some water and other environmental protection goals that they're rolling back. So, I think in 6 months, let's check in on this again and see if they're really trying to go after the EPA in a more serious, targeted way. But right now we're headed back to 2010, 2012 era regulations. We're not going back to the 1950s yet. So let's kind of wait and see on this one. Another question from Fergus McCullough. What do you think will happen with Obamacare after the recent backlash in town halls? I think Obamacare, repealing it's one of the key campaign promises, both of Trump and of Republicans in the House and Senate. Every single Republican there has already voted to repeal Obamacare in the 2015 bill that President Obama vetoed. They've been promising it to their constituents for almost a decade now. I think it's something they have to deliver on.
But do all their constituents now want that, though? I mean, you're having Republican constituents who are pushing back and saying, you can repeal, but what's the alternative? You can't just take away my care and not have a plan in place.
Yes and no. I mean, 80% of the country has coverage through their employer. So
80%?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah, it's really high. Most people are covered by the kind of insurance that you and I have. And there's 30 million people who get coverage in the exchanges or through Medicaid, the Medicaid expansion. And it's so those people will be affected, but I think ultimately they'll find some way to keep the tax credits alive so people can buy coverage and probably keep the Medicaid expansion in place. So they're not going to outright repeal it. That was never the plan. They can't outright repeal it, not through the reconciliation process. They have to leave a lot of it in place. And I think ultimately there will be a replacement. It just is going to take some time to get here.
So it'll be sort of a transformed Obamacare.
Yeah, I mean, Obamacare is going to be with us. Like, Obamacare is not going away. It's going to be his enduring legacy. A lot of the the mandates, coverage mandates, the regulations that were done through Obamacare will be here for the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm. But they will repeal things like the tax subsidies, the tax penalties, probably parts of the Medicaid expansion.
Okay, mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, so I think the politics of this aren't as bad as it looks if you just watch the town halls. I mean, although you could have said that in 2009 when every Democrat that was a leader in pushing this thing through lost their seat. So is that where we're headed? I think it's too early to say. Last question, I think, also from Fergus McCullough. Thanks, Fergus, for your 2 questions. Do you think the leaks from the intelligence community will continue or peter out? Meredith, what do you think about this one?
I think it depends upon the relationship that the new National Security Advisor is able to forge with the intelligence community. Clearly, the way that the president treated the intelligence community rubbed them the wrong way, and they had some real concerns about some of the conversations that some of his picks were having with the Russians. And also, I would probably say that there's some real concern within the IC about his discounting of intelligence writ large. So that relationship is tense right now, and it will only get better if the White House makes a move in trying to forge a better relationship with the IC. IC is not going to go away. I mean, they can have their funding slashed, but they are still the ones on the front lines of trying to keep the country safe from terrorist attacks, and working with partnered governments across the world to help them foil terrorist attacks as well. So it's in both their interests to find a way forward. But the new National Security Advisor would probably be a key linchpin to help do that.
Can't the Trump administration start prosecuting leaks the same way the Obama administration did? Isn't that what's going to happen?
Yeah, they absolutely could. But here's the problem, though: there are leaks coming from the IC, but there are also leaks coming from within his own administration. There are leaks and with conversations that are happening in the Oval, and there are only so many people in the Oval that can hear that kind of conversation.
Well, but they don't have to go out. They're not going to go after Rance Priebus for leaking something, but they can go after Joe, National Security Advisor, for leaking something. They could,
but the leaks are not just with the IC. The leaks are actually across the interagency and even within the own White House. And so, what will help to stop the leaks is when people who are involved in the policy-making process or have something to say, something to contribute in the policy-making process, feel that there actually is a process in which they can at least air their views in front of the president. He can look at all of the information and then make a decision about how he wants to go ahead. Then they will all support his decision, whatever that is. Right now, they have a sense that the White House is making decisions without even consulting any of the agencies who have responsibility over the areas of policy that he's making. And that's leading to this sense of grievance, and thus, I think, to the leaks as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are angry, and I mean, he certainly started off on a wrong foot with the intelligence community. I think it seems like there's pushback on their alleged sympathies towards Russia that people are concerned about, that they want to kind of get that out, air that out in public. But I think they just have to start prosecuting a couple people for these leaks, and they're going to turn around, right?
They will, but I would say, like, for example, the Pentagon and the Defense Department, notorious leaking all throughout the Obama administration. Yeah. And we have a now with General Mattis that could stop, but there's a track record of this, and people use leaks also to try
leaks are a time-honored tradition, of course.
They
that's the way
to influence policy, to influence leaders' decision-making, and sometimes to embarrass leaders when they make a decision that the agency lost out on. So it's something that I think they'll have to manage moving forward.
It's definitely slowed down from the first couple of chaotic weeks, right? I mean, like the whole chaos of this administration, the first 2 weeks were really hard to follow and fast-moving, partially because of the immigration order, partially because of the leaks, partially because of Russia. A couple of things were going on. But now it's kind of slowed down. It's becoming more normal, right? It looks more normal.
So this is what we're saying. Are we seeing a return to normalcy with the Trump administration, do you think?
I mean, yeah. I mean, you're going to see more kind of adult leaders who have more experience in government taking over in key positions. You're going to see more of the cabinet get filled out by people who are kind of steadier hands, more power devolving away from the White House, more pushback from Congress, more constraints from the courts. I think all these things are going to happen and grow with time. Now, there's still some revolutionaries, again, inside the White House who are going to be pushing a very aggressive agenda, and they will be successful at times and fail at other times. But I think that, you are seeing the constraints become really clear and apparent around Donald Trump right now.
Fascinating. Well, hey, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Meredith Sumpter. This is my colleague John Lieber. It's our pleasure to talk with you, but also, would you please post future topics that you would like us to cover? It could be anything politics, it could be U.S., it could be foreign policy.
Fashion.
That's John's topic. We'll do our best to cover and look forward to onward conversations with you. Thanks very much.